Welcome to Studying Law Around the World. I'm Claudio Klaus. In each episode, I talk with lawyers, law students, and professors from different parts of the world to talk about legal education, careers, and what the profession looks like in real life. We talk about the hard parts, the surprises, and the decisions that shaped their paths. Whether you're planning to study abroad, thinking about working in another legal system, or just curious about how law works around the world, this podcast is for you. This episode is sponsored by Contender. How are you doing on LinkedIn? If you're like 99% of lawyers, your answer is not great, which makes sense. You learned LinkedIn as the place to stash a digital resume and share firm pressers. So no wonder your LinkedIn presence is somewhere between vanilla and non-existent. But I've got good news. Since we all learned LinkedIn the wrong way, it's pretty easy to attract more positive attention for you or your business. Since 2022, Contender has been the premier agency helping lawyers go from invisible to impossible to ignore on LinkedIn. To learn more, check out www.contenderllc.com. Tell them Claudio sent you.
Today, I have the opportunity to interview Fernando Garcia, who is the Chief Legal and People Officer at Opta Group. Thank you so much for joining us today, Fernando.
My absolute pleasure. Great to be here, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you for your time and willingness to be here in the podcast today. We are super excited to ask you many, many questions about your profession and how you got to where you're at today. And to start it off, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to your audience.
Yeah, great. My name is Fernando Garcia, born in Argentina and grew up in Canada. So I've been here for a long, long time. And just my role currently is a mix of both legal and HR. But I have close to 20 years in the general counsel role at different organizations. And my background previous to law school or to my legal profession was labor relations and HR. So I had I did my BA in labor studies. I did Masters of Labor Relations, and I decided to go to law school. Did the legal education, and then completed afterward an MBA as well. So I've always been interested, and I've always had a passion about sort of the legal realm, but also business and HR. And I think those three are three critical components of any organization that you work for. And so it's something that I've always wanted to have a good understanding and a good grasp of three different type of practices and try my best to bring them together in terms of my profession and in terms of how I do my work.
That's amazing. All right. I love that you said that your background mixes everything that it sounds like what a good in-house lawyer would have, right? A good notion of what goes on in a business and then the HR portion of it. So that's just so fantastic.
I would love to say that there was a master plan behind it, but it sort of just happened as I became knowledgeable and aware of one particular practice area, and then I thought, "Ooh, that's really interesting. I wonder how I can marry it with the other one." And so it just I can't say I had a master plan. It just sort of happened, and I went with opportunities as they came up. But I think there's a lot of complementary elements of the function and the roles that I play, and that's how I've really fashioned my career and how I fashioned my approach to the legal practice.
Amazing. Well, to dive right into the questions of today's
Yeah.
podcast, I'd love to hear, what first sparked that interest on you to become an in-house counsel and to have, a little bit more of this applying all of this education that you had and all these skills together.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I started in human resources and labor relations, so I did some work at Ontario Power Generation, the labor relations department there when I was doing my master's, and I got to work with some really really good professionals, both with regard to in-house at the company, with regard to my labor relations department, and also with external counsel. So that sort of got me thinking about maybe I should go to law school. I think it'd be kind of cool. I did have, a passion for labor relations at that time, the negotiations element of it, dealing with grievances, arbitration, that kind of stuff. So I thought, hey, it's a good logical next step to go to law school. So I did that. And I had already, like I said before, I had already a master's of labor relations and background in that. So when I was going through law school, I tried to focus most of my courses in labor relations type realm. And I graduated went to work at a law firm, a boutique labor and employment law firm, and I really enjoyed it. It was a great experience. But I made a decision at that point that I didn't necessarily want to be brought into a file to deal with an issue and then go away. I loved more the being part of the initial strategy, developing the strategy, being part of the implementation of that strategy, and seeing it through to the end. I also liked the idea of being with the same people, working with the same people over and over again on a longer term relationship. I always say it's like a marathon rather than a sprint. And so that those were things that really attracted me to be in-house versus sort of in a law firm somewhere where you got to deal with specific issues and then you walked away. Or even more importantly, when you're in-house, you tend to work on different elements. So, one day, especially as a GC in a smaller or mid-sized firm, one day you're working on a real estate matter, the next day you're dealing with a labor relations matter, then you're working on contract review, then you're working on negotiations. So if no single day is the same as the other, I'm just the type of person that if I was the lawyer in charge of Forms 37 4C or whatever, I would not do well. I like the diversity of work. I like the being involved early on, not just firefighting. So I thought that was more a better fit towards in-house. And I will say that my experience has been that indeed that was the right decision for me. Not for everybody maybe, but for me that was the best choice for my own capabilities and my own interests.
Well, that's amazing. And in this work, some years ago, you launched this whole idea of being, a plus-shaped lawyer. So you talked about the importance that in-house counsel to be a little more of that, be that pre-active lawyer, as you put into articles in the past. And I'd love to know a little more about what those terms mean and how they change the way we think about legal careers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a concept out there, a model out there called a T-shaped lawyer, and it's a great concept. And the concept is that your sort of horizontal skill set is your ability to know the law and work within the law. And all lawyers have that, right? And you go to law school, you get trained to be a lawyer, so you're very good at that piece of it. But then there's something else. I think, especially for in-house counsel, the value that you bring is not just knowing, hey, this is what the law says. Great. But you have to be able to tie that into the multiple elements of being a proper, knowledgeable lawyer. And that means, having a good understanding of the business, having a good understanding of the financial elements, having a good understanding of the team, the risk tolerance of the organization, why they're doing certain things. So the broader perspective or the broader tool sets that you bring in to being an in-house counsel mean that you can have all the legal knowledge you want and be a very good lawyer. That doesn't necessarily mean you will be a good in-house counsel. In-house counsel requires a deeper understanding of other areas as well of that affect your decision, that affect the implementation of your decision and they get you involved. So that the T-shaped lawyer sort of influenced me quite a bit, the concept. But then I said, hey, listen, there should be another element too. So just trying to get cute with the model. I added the little plus sheet, the little piece at the top, which said you can know all the skills and tasks and know how to do that. You can be good at, project management. You can be good at all these other elements. But there's also an emotional intelligence element that's very critical of being a successful in-house counsel. And that means, being able to work with people across multiple jurisdictions, in diverse working environments, a good mindset in terms of, not being a department of no, knowing how to deal with internal conflict, being able to manage all that. That's sort of not a skill per se in terms of a skill that you can learn. That's sort of an emotional skill set. And that I think that's where I added the additional piece at the top of the plus shape lawyer concept. I mean, it was just an idea I threw out there, and it had quite a bit of success at the time. And I wrote a lot of articles about it, and it was an interesting model. But at the end of the day, if you were to sum all that up into one, small box, the concept is when you're in house, you should try to always develop yourself and grow to know as many different areas, get involved in as many different matters as you can, get in there early, ask for, additional responsibilities and always grow, right? Always look at what am I doing to gain more knowledge, gain more experience, or grow my own experience and be part of the team whereby you're not just part of the team to give legal advice, but you're part of the team to implement decisions and to build those decisions and the strategies. So it's it's a whole perspective of, how you can grow yourself, improve yourself, and become more and more valuable to the organization.
Oh, that's fantastic, and I'm so happy to hear that this is something that more professionals are thinking of. And thank you for taking your time to put some words out there on this topic as well. I think it's so important more and more that we realize that our responsibility is not only legal work, right, but really understanding all of those things. And I'm sure that the most successful in-house counsel or just lawyers in general do have those notions really clear to them.
Yeah, because I mean, especially when you're in-house counsel, I tend to find that the amount of legal work you do becomes less and less proportionate in terms of your day-to-day, right? Managing people, working with teams, coming up with strategies, dealing with those kind of things become increasingly more important. And you tend to find you do less and less law and you do more and more managing those relationships, managing those strategies and becoming involved in that. So it's a different mindset. I always say, you're more of a business person with a legal degree than you are a lawyer in many ways. So you got to like that. If that's what you like, if that's what you're passionate about, then that's when in-house counsel type functions or opportunities really become valuable to you. I know some people say, oh, but you're gonna, have an easier work-life balance. Yeah, that could be true, not always. But that, it's a function. But really, what should be driving your interest is to, really become part of the business and be ingrained in the business and take responsibility for what happens and be a real part of a team. I think that's really the key of.
And that's amazing. And still in this general area of doing all you can and all of that,
Mhm.
I've read some of your work again, and you've been very open with your views about remote work, especially for early careers and young lawyers. So I'd love
Mhm.
for you to tell us a little more about that, about why you think working in person will matter so much, especially for those junior lawyers and especially those with diverse backgrounds in
Yeah,
person.
I'm not mindful of the time that's invested in getting into work. I mean, yeah, especially younger lawyers now, they're faced with really high costs of living in major metropolitan areas or where your job might be. It takes a long time to get into work and out of work. So if you have the technology and the abilities to do things externally and remotely and from home, I don't think it's an issue so much of you're working less or an issue about being lazy. I think it really is an issue about being there in person and learning from others. When I look back into my own personal career, and again, everybody's situation is different, so I always like to preface that, right? But in my particular case, being on the ground, walking from point A to point B for an arbitration hearing and discussing with their senior lawyer the strategy that we're going to be implementing it, why it's important, being able to get to that level of building a relationship, having you thrown into things last minute, meeting the parties, understanding the reasons behind certain things and the strategies that you're going to be implementing. There was a huge value to that. There was a value to that only happens when you're there in person. In labor relations, some of the hallway meetings that took place that resolved the matter or that resulted in a collective agreement being signed, those were things that happened impromptu. Those things were informal conversations that took place. They say, "Hey, Junior, come along, listen to the conversation we're gonna have." That's when you really learn that skill set, and you just can't dial that part in. You can't just be, "Hey, let's jump into a Zoom call and talk about the strategy." There is some of that, but most of it happens informally and happens without plan and happens sort of in an environment where if you're not there in person, you're missing that. So I think there's two parts. One, I think, after investing so much time and effort and money into your legal career, if you can put in a good 4 or 5 years and go into the office and learn from the people there, especially if you work in a big firm and you're getting thrown into cases. Like I remember when I was at the boutique labor employment law firm, we wanted to be the first person in the office every day because guess what? A lawyer would walk down the hall and say, "Hey, I need somebody to go to court for me today. I can't make it." Who's going? You want to be the first person there to get the best assignment, to be able to get in there, to get into court, to get into a meeting with a client. You just need to do that in person. On the other side of the coin, the senior lawyers, I think they can work from home. Hey, look, they already have established their relationships. They already know what they're doing. They already have their practice. They don't need to learn from anyone, but they now have an obligation to teach others. And in the same vein, you can teach others through a conversation, you can teach others through a video conference. But I think the biggest value still comes from taking that person under your wing, taking them to a session or a hearing, getting to meet the clients, getting them, to understand how the strategies developed or how we're developing, a relationship with a client. How do we get a new client? Like there's so many elements of it that you really got to be on the ground. And again, once you've invested that much time and effort into your career, just to add those other 4 or 5 years at the time, maybe hopefully you don't have as many other challenges or commitments on your time. Why not? Again, hard to say because I'm not unmindful that some people are single parents or some people don't have maybe childcare services and don't have all these other things. And I get that. I'm not trying to be unmindful of that. But what I'm saying is, if you can, you should be there. Whether it's required or not, I would be the first person there in the morning and I'll try to be the last person. No, at least for the first 4 or 5 years to learn. I mean, that's what you're trying to do, trying to be out there to learn. And I just can't see it. As good as technology is, I don't see the same value. Like I've been in situations where, especially during COVID, where we're having virtual calls with a lawyer. A junior lawyer pops in, and the senior lawyer afterward goes, "Yeah, I don't even know who that was. I've never met them before." You need to be there in person. And again, I'm a person that really values, human relationships and human touch, and just being at a situation or at a location with a person. And I just don't think you can call it enough. Can you work 3 days a week from the office and maybe 2 days from home? Sure, why not? But I really think that if you can, then there's a value to that because if you're present, you're more likely to be visible. And when you talk about diversity, I look at it and I think, coming myself as a racialized lawyer, early on, when I came out of law school in particular, I didn't have the networks other people had. I didn't have the connections in the profession that other people had. I had a disadvantage in that sense. And I had to build that and I had to develop that and I had to go to events to start building a network. And there was a value to that in person piece. So I think if you were to say, look, just dial it in, never have to come in, the people who are going to be adversely affected the most are going to be the people who don't have those networks and who are challenged in that sense. And that tends to be new Canadians who maybe don't have the connections here. That tends to be diverse, members from diverse communities that maybe don't have family members that are lawyers or friends that are lawyers or grew up around lawyers. So they're the ones who I think, even though in some ways it helps them maybe too, because you don't have to come into the office and if you live a little further away. But at the same time, I think there's also potential that that person's going to be the ones that are hurt the most because, that I always like to say, we fought long and hard to get a seat at the business table. The last thing we want to do is then not be at the table when there's decisions or businesses, situations being made. And when you're looking at it in-house, right? I worked at an airline before. Your pilots had to come to work. Your baggage handlers had to come into work. Everybody else had to come into work. How does it look if the legal person is the person who's not coming to work, right? They're working from. It just sends the wrong message, right? It's a one team effort, and it's good to be there in person. Somebody walk in your door and say, "Hey, listen, can I chat with you for a second?" Because that tends to be where most of the issues are addressed.
Very interesting. And I have to say that it's not hard to agree with you, right? If you think about especially senior leadership being there in the office every day, seeing who's there, and it does speak a lot, maybe even about the unspoken rules of the office too, right? Of the
Mm-hmm.
things that maybe people don't say, but that are happening every day. And going forward, I'd love to hear a little more about another topic that I think it's really interesting and you've wrote about before. And it's about going in-house after law school. And so
Yeah.
we hear a lot about, the traditional career path where you spend a considerate amount of time at a firm and then transition to going into an in-house role. But it seems that more and more different companies are open to having more junior professionals coming in, or people who have had another career before law and all of that. Context dependent, of course, but based on your career and all of that, what would you say about this whole situation of how do you become an in-house lawyer?
Yeah, I'm going to give you the lawyer answer. It depends. And it really does depend on many variables and factors, right? Like one thing, for example, on my situation, I had already a background in labor relations and HR. I had
Mhm.
many years working in the area. So an opportunity became available as a general counsel 2 years after I graduated from law school at a company, a trucking company, a nice company. But again, I had already quite a bit of experience in that area. That was an area that they had to fill. So it became easier for them to say, hire this guy, even though, I didn't work as long as other people had to do in a law firm. The old model used to be, you worked 5 years in a law firm, you became a specialist in a particular area or knowledgeable enough. You then basically became that skill set for that company in that particular area. And then when you were in there, then you diversified and grew into other areas. You moved up, up from a associate counsel to a senior counsel to associate general counsel to a general counsel. So you moved in. But the key was, how did you get your foot in the door? What skill set did you use to get in the door? And once you were in the door, it's all up to you to build your career. And and there's still that path available for many people. But the point is, now we have people who are coming in with more background, coming in with more experience. Just look at some of the international lawyers we talked about, right? They're coming in, they're lawyers somewhere else. They're bringing a wealth of information and knowledge and abilities. You don't necessarily need to get somebody like that to go in there for 5 years to prove themselves to then get into an in-house role. Now, if you find the right opportunity and it comes up to you and, it happens at articling, why not? If it comes in after a year working in a law firm, why not? It's all about where you want to end up in terms of your career, what your objectives are, and what opportunities become available, right? I think like I always, preparation and luck. Luck comes in at some point, and you just have to be able to, when somebody comes knocking, you got to be able to answer the door. Um, so is it the right thing for everyone? Maybe, maybe not. Is everyone going to have that opportunity? Maybe, maybe not. But the point is, I wouldn't necessarily discount the ability to go in-house early on. It just means that you have to understand that when you're in law school is important, but it's not going to be the only thing that you're going to do every single day. Because you're not just going to do law, you're going to do a little bit more of everything. And if you're okay with that, I think it's a great opportunity. I always say, especially as in-house counsel, you fly by the seat of your pants every day. Oftentimes you get, the whole imposter syndrome thing. I always say that happens all the time. And it's actually a good thing because it means you're doing things outside your zone of comfort. It means you're doing things that you're not used to doing. And it means you're learning. You're learning a new skill set. You're learning a new practice area. And you do a lot of that. And I tend to find, especially in-house counsel, that nobody's ever going to say no if you ask to do more work or to help out with a particular matter or to be. So it's all about you at that point in time. But the point is, the 5-year model isn't the only way there. And I'll say that as legal technology comes into play, and you got AI and all these other things, there might be less and less need for law firms, junior articling students in law firms. So you need to find another approach, and that in-house counsel, I think, is a perfect opportunity.
Very, very interesting. Thank you for sharing those views. And going for really the end of this very interesting conversation today, Fernando, I wanted to ask you also about, thinking that a great portion of my audience today in the podcast are people who are law students graduating law school or really early career professionals. So I'd love to know, what kind of advice would you give to people who are finishing that up and are going into the market right now on their first few years? What are some of the things that you usually tell people when they ask you for advice?
The one piece of advice I always give them is, have an idea where you want to get to, but don't have a single approach of getting there, because that's not how life works, right? You always have a plan until somebody punches you in the face. It's sort of the old saying, right? There's going to be lots of things that come up, lots of challenges and lots of opportunities that you have not planned for, that you shouldn't necessarily discount. And I'll give you a good example of my background, right? So I graduated from law school. I did the articling at a boutique labor and employment law firm. And early on, it was an amazing firm. I got to work with some amazing people. But again, I knew that that wasn't necessarily for me. I wanted to do more of the business side. I wanted to do more of the HR, more of the labor relations side. So I was presented with an opportunity to do a 6-month labor relations consultant role at one of the companies I had done some work with while I was at the firm. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet. So I'm going to take it. So I did a 6 months labor relations management role after going to law school. And the comments everybody say was, why would you do that? What are you doing? How does that make any sense? So everybody questioned it. But for me, it was a logical next step, or at least plausible, because look, I had that background and something that was of interest to me. I had worked with this client, I had given them some advice, worked on some stuff for them. So I did that for 6 months. And when that came to an end, I went to another boutique labor employment law firm for another year and a half. And then the general counsel retired. When that general counsel retired, they were looking for general counsel. And I said, hey, listen, I applied for it. Now, was I maybe a little bit undergrad? Maybe. But by that point, I already knew the people, I knew the contracts, I knew the issues, I knew the strategies, I knew everything that was happening with that firm, and I think that gave me an opportunity to jump into that role as a general counsel, 2 years out of law school. And then once you're in, then at that point you're learning everything, and you have an opportunity to learn from incredible people, from incredible business people and team members. So when I look back, I probably 9 out of 10 times, people would have said, "That's a stupid idea. Were you going to go a labor relations manager role after you graduated from law school? What's wrong with you?" But it became the key for me because that role, the general counsel role for 5 years, that allowed me to go into Nissan as the general counsel for 5 years, amazing time, great experience. Then that Nissan experience allowed me to go to Cargojet, and the Cargojet experience allowed me to come here. So I've been able to develop my career from that one opportunity that I took, which most people thinking rationally have been, well, does that really make sense for you right now? But it made
Mhm.
sense. It doesn't always go from A to B. There's lots of little ups and downs and sideways and things that your career takes you that you're not aware, like that you didn't plan for. The key is always be developing yourself, always be developing a new skill set, and it sometimes take a chance and sometimes do something that maybe is outside a little bit of your comfort zone. But and don't worry about what other people say. Worry about what you need to do or what you think is right in your situation. Um, so it's always one of those things where take advice, take people's insights and their perspectives, but at the end of the day, have an idea of what your values are, what you want to do, where your goals are, and as long as you're moving towards that direction, it might not be linear, but as long as you're moving forward in some sense of developing some skill set, then I think it's always a good move. So the world's changing, our career is changing, our industry is changing, legal technology is changing it substantially. Just look at ChatGPT. What roles are going to be there in 2, 3 years from now? Who knows? The point is, still do what you got to do and develop yourself and your skill set. And I think you can't go wrong regardless of what you do in that sense.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so very much for all the insights, all the ideas, and especially this important piece of advice to be up to date, open, and also like check it out, see what legal technology is coming out there, right? We don't know
Mhm.
what's going to come up, but it's likely that we'll have to interact with those. So
Oh
there's
yeah.
no better generation better equipped to deal with that than these young lawyers coming in who are I like the term they use now, like the digital natives, right? So
Yeah.
we've grown up with these tools, and we should definitely use the most out of them.
But
So
it's nothing
thank you.
new, right? Because when you look back, right?
There
So
you go. There you go.
I'm old enough to remember, right, when we had keyboards, right, typewriters.
Yep.
Everybody said, "Oh well, the computer's going to fundamentally change your job and it's going to destroy so many jobs." And it did. I mean, yes, there were some modifications and some adjustments, but at the end of the day, lawyers adopted computers and made them that much more productive, right? Then the internet came out. That's going to fundamentally change commerce. It's going to fundamentally change everything. It did, but things continue. We still needed lawyers. We just needed lawyers with different skill sets. Then you came out with, right now the ChatGPTs or the artificial intelligence. Is that going to fundamentally change our practice? Absolutely. Does that mean you're not going to have lawyers anymore? Not a chance. What it's going to mean is like, and I always say to people, you're not going to lose your job because of AI. But at the same time, if you're not adopting AI into practice, then you might lose your job. It's just another tool that you add to your tool belt that makes you much more valuable, that makes you much more effective, efficient, and it just lets you do your job better. So you can't turn a blind eye to it and you can't be completely afraid of it. You should adopt it, understand what it does, understand its limitations, and really help you, make you better.
I love that. Thank you for putting that insight as well. Well, thank you all so much for tuning into today's episode. Thank you, Fernando, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. This episode was sponsored by Contender. Check them out at contenderllc.com.